the function, as I see it, or as I theorize, of misogyny could be collective or coordinated condemnation of men trying to collectively lower women's self-esteem so they stand a chance. And we see an analog of this within relationships. So low mate value men within relationships choose what's called a cost-inflicting mate retention strategy, where they literally try and lower their partner's self-esteem so that they are less inclined to leave them. And they say things specifically like, who else would have you except me? Look at you. And that really try and lower the self-esteem or the mate value of their partner so they're easier to retain. It's really dark kind of stuff. So the way I kind of characterize this collective group misogyny is like that strategy, except from outside outside relationships. Now, the collective condemnation or coordinated condemnation of doing it as a group, there's a reason that incels and these misogynistic men primarily talk to each other. They hang out in forums that overwhelmingly consist of just men. And yes, they express the misogyny towards women eventually, or in some cases, but it only works if other men are doing it too. So if you're the only misogynist and you're trying to lower a woman's self-esteem, you are very easily dismissed as just one asshole. Right? Whereas if you convince most boys in your social milieu to come to the same conclusion about Katie, that she's weak at this moment, she's flat-chested, whatever it might be, then you maybe stand a chance and you're not the asshole. So if you think about the character in Adolescence, what Jamie tried to do was capitalize on other peer members of his lowering her self-esteem. So I thought that was a very, very sophisticated kind of allusion from the show. Whether it was intentional or not, I don't know, but it kind of does speak to the way this misogyny operates and how the functional element to it. And particularly ancestrally, this would have been very important because it was small-scale society. There was only a certain amount of young men in your social milieu. If you convinced 9 out of the 10 of them to lower the woman's self-esteem, to all come to the conclusion that she's getting too big for her boots kind of thing, it may work. Whereas now in the modern world, there's so much positive reinforcement from a woman through Instagram likes, whatever it might be, that this strategy isn't really that effective. It's still easy to dismiss someone as just an incel. But it is very interesting that mostly these misogynistic men are talking to each other and trying to get them to come to the same conclusion. And if you think about the misogynistic rhetoric, it's so targeted towards mate value. If you think about functional design for a type of attack towards someone, that the goal was to get her to lower her standards, you'd say things like, oh, you're not as pretty as you... And you think incels do this all the time. They say women don't want their looks matched. They have way too high standards. They say things like, oh, you're going to hit the wall when you're over 30. Your mate value will run out. There's lots of sort of things. They even condemn their taste. So they say, oh, you choose the wrong type of man. You choose Chad for his looks, but he ends up hurting you. All of this is kind of designed... You should have lower standards, you should make a decision earlier and perhaps settle on me. So that's an interesting thing that the show somewhat touched on.
So these guys, they feel they can't provide value themselves to these women. So instead of adding benefits to her life and providing value, they inflict cost on her to avoid her from running off with these other potentially high status or higher status men that she's hanging out with.
Precisely. And that's exactly the way it works within relationships. Men who are high mate value choose the benefit provisioning strategy. Lower mate value men choose the cost infliction strategy. And we do see in the recent research, there's been a lot of research in the last number of years that show this trend that misogyny is most pronounced in low mate value men and men who are have unwanted celibacy. So not just incels, but men who don't define themselves as incel subculture, but find themselves with unwanted celibacy. That is a big predictor of misogyny too. So the show might have inadvertently or very sophisticated way got at something important, I think.
So following that logic, do you think that with the rise of all of these trends online of female empowerment and, you know, body positivity, it seems that all of these traits that used to be called toxic masculinity, of being overly assertive and not giving a fuck about anyone else, are now signs of female empowerment. It seems to me that what you're suggesting is the more those circles grow trying to empower women, the more the criticism is going to grow too of low status men feeling like they're having to contend with all these women online with loads of likes and affirmation.
Yes, and there is evidence to show that the more kind of free you make women's choice, and the more kind of economic power they get, that's where incels arise. There's a really cool study done that find you can predict geographic areas of more incel activity, more incel rhetoric, based on 3 variables. So number 1, income inequality, where there's a large gap between high status men and low status men. Number 2, low gender pay gaps, where women are not needing to depend on men in the same way, where women kind of are free to have higher standards. You see a lot more incel rhetoric there, where there are fewer men that women desire. And then the final variable is just male-biased sex ratios. So when there's fewer single women to go around in the first place. So even information in the local mating ecology, as kind of crude as that, can predict the rise of or the intensity of incel rhetoric. Because it is quite like that maybe perhaps in the modern mating market, women don't need to settle in ways that they might have in previous generations. Even in the show, it kind of hinted at it that his father, it went into the storyline of how he met his wife, the kid's mother, and it was just at school, and they got together kind of straightforward, and it was a clear path to how to form a romantic relationship. I think the modern mating market for young people is very atomized. The kind of the social institutions of how you might meet someone are kind of vanishing, and it's kind of being funneled towards just online. Which perhaps isn't doing anyone any favors. Both sexes seem to not like the online dating. But yeah, institutions like even meeting your partner at work is kind of frowned upon now. It's not the done thing. So all of this is kind of creating a kind of an atomization where young men and young women are more responsible for their own dating life, which is pretty evolutionarily novel. I mean, you had a lot of kin networks or even friends setting you up on dates in the past. That's kind of novel. Now you're responsible for it yourself. And it could lead to a lot of disgruntlement from both men and women in how to do that. So women will have the problem of there are fewer desirable men around because they're outpacing them in terms of education and employment. And men might feel resentment at, well, in past generations, it would have been a lot easier for us to find someone to settle down with us, but now they don't want to. So it's causing resentment for both groups.
There's so much to dig into there. And I want to stick just on the topic of status for a little bit. Something that gets reiterated a few times in the show is this Pareto's principle idea of 80% of women being attracted to 20% of men. And one of the actors, he's the cop's son. He goes on to say something that almost sounds scripted, like he's just reciting from an Andrew Tate video he's seen online or whatever. That's sort of what was implied, I think. He goes on and he says, women, you must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way, following that Pareto's principle quote. How much truth is there to that 80-20 rule?
Well, I think there is some truth to that there is what we call attraction inequality in the mating market. So more men are attracted to more women than women are attracted to men, all things being equal. Now, something as crude and as hard and fast like an 80-20 rule is a little bit kind of a blunt analysis. But like you say, that Pareto distribution applies to almost anything. The kind of the very narrow top end of the success spectrum gets a lot of the success. And it perhaps in the past, there were these social institutions. So, for example, monogamy is one. We have a deep ancestral history of polygyny, where one high-status man would have multiple wives.
83% of history, right?
83% of human societies had preferential polygyny. Now, that doesn't mean that there was a lot of polygyny in those societies, but it just meant that that most high-status man would have multiple wives. Most men in those societies would still only have one wife, but the fact that some men at the very top do have more than one does mean there are others kind of left out.